Here to debunk all notions of a single user experience when it comes to discoverability is Nathan. Nathan is the Senior Director of Merchandising for Kobo, where he manages a globe-spanning team of booksellers. Please join me in welcoming Nathan.
Yes, as rumored, I am Nathan Maharaj. I am all the things said. Working at Kobo, for those of you who don't know what Kobo is, perhaps you were born American or something wrong with you like that. We sell ebooks. That's all the background you need. So I want to start with a bit of a story. Let's think back to summer of last year, right? Is everyone going back there? Lots of things were better. Lots of things were different. We were younger. There was a bunch of stuff going on, right? That was nice, wasn't it? The shines come off that. That was less nice, and that's still a problem. I have no recollection of this actually happening. It might be misuse of quotes. Yeah. Fake news, precisely. We're off to a great start. Of course, that's not what I'm on about. I'm referring, of course, to a headline-grabbing battle of humans versus the machines that would exterminate them. Right? No, I'm talking about this. I'm talking about when an employee of Facebook revealed that the Facebook trending news section, a product of human editors following rigorous guidelines to sort through the news of the day, was in fact a product of human editors following rigorous guidelines to sort through the news of the day. Shock, horror. Knowledgeable analysis met its match with confirmation bias operating at scale. So this workplace gripe of a single employee, it became an accusation, then it became a charge, and it became a verdict. In response, Facebook took a page from their founding values, kicked it like back in the day, and wiped out their editorial team. In place of these impulsive, messy, easily swayed humans with all their biases, automated news scraping algorithms were installed which operated reliably at scale and with their own peculiarities. War was declared. You don't pick fights with editors. They fought back the machine-led apocalypse with their own weapons. The battle today still rages on. But it's a story that, though it happened at the bleeding edge of technology, it reaches back beyond John Henry hammering through the mountain. To the first time, a small number of humans with technology accomplished more than many more humans without. I think machines have always, in some sort of cultural narrative, been vying for someone's job. Last summer, though, the tone felt like it shifted. We knowledge-working types in this room, we've had a long time to get used to the idea that there's no manual job beyond the reach of automation, right? Our jobs becoming in any way becoming automated, though, that's kind of new, right? And if for any of you this is the first time you've considered being displaced by a machine, I'm really sorry. And drinks are in less than 2 hours. So take comfort in flexibility, right? The young have it sorted. My train-loving eldest son once dreamed of driving diesel trains across Canada. I've disabused him of the notion that this is even a job inside of 5 years. And in his place, he now dreams of building and programming robots to excavate dinosaur bones. My youngest son, who remembers everything he hears, has overheard enough autonomous podcasts to know that autonomous cars are going to remove any reason for him to even get a license, let alone driving trains. He's going to live off-grid. He will surface only to participate in creative anachronism, and he's gonna figure it out, okay? I'm not too worried about him, but I'm a little worried about us. It's probably because I work in a bookstore and have far too many of these around me. Experts have been warning us, those of us with somewhat narrower career options than 4- and 7-year-olds, that we can't be so sanguine. We're not going to be this flexible. We need to figure something out. Shelves are groaning under the weight of these doomsayers, these popular science books on the subject of artificial intelligence and its unavoidable impact on the economy. Note also, as we follow the diversity panel, these are all basically the same book from a certain point of view. It's a major sausage party of a certain pigmentation, but it's a separate discussion. Unfortunately, as you'll find in the Tech Forum archives, data shows that nobody's really reading these books all the way through anyway. So if there's any wisdom there, especially in the back half, we're unlikely to have to ever uncover it, and it might as well not have been written. So we're going to have to go on without it. Seriously, though, this narrative, this job-killing thing, it's everywhere. It's a zero-sum story. It's an age-old blood feud. It's us versus them. Sometimes. I think them has a little more game, right? I underplayed it. But it's, the thing about the Facebook trending news story was, up to that point, it felt like we were still having the debate, right? We were going to keep talking about whether machines could ever fill a job that was largely regarded as belonging to the realm exclusively of human cognition. Maybe it'll happen someday, maybe not. Let's read, or pretend to read, or intend to read some book on the topic, and we'll check in again and see where things stand. But then all of a sudden, it had happened. The decision was made in a really public way by really powerful forces. And the choice between human or machine was kind of done, and a group of humans lost. So I'm not picking on Facebook, okay? I want to make that clear. It's not about them. I'm citing their painfully public struggle to set the stage for a discussion about technology and the value of work. Specifically, the work done by the team I get to work with at Kobo. Email marketers, data scientists, merchandisers, all kinds of people who do a lot of work that I barely comprehend, and here I am. The world is unfair. I unmask myself as a robot who has taken over jobs at the end. You'll see. At Kobo, we're not struggling against machine intelligence, though. We're using it. More importantly, we're getting better at our jobs because of it. Nobody at Kobo thinks algorithm is a four-letter word. To explain kind of how we get there, though, let's jump back a couple of decades to the birth of online bookselling. Everybody's got to start somewhere. When bookselling moved online, it was almost a quarter century ago. That's alarming, right? It was kind of like moving house, or maybe Noah's Ark. We squeezed in the essence of what we thought we should take with us. We left a lot behind, but we figured we captured it, right? When we think of books displayed in a bookstore, we think of aisles and tables and end caps. And so online, we figured out banners and landing pages and lists and carousel after carousel. You know the drill, right? Sometimes it's about being timely, other times it's about being cheap and cheerful, but in any case, the wheel has not been reinvented, really. In the very early days, though, of online bookselling, some enterprising booksellers developed recommendations algorithms. More on that in a moment. And automated personalized recommendations are hugely useful. So let's be clear, the man versus machine thing is not on right here. Personalized recommendations are great. What bookstore would not benefit from at least one employee who knows which customers bought which books, when, and has recommendations, thousands of recommendations, for every single customer, no matter what they're reading, and can be trusted never to condescend, or to flatter, or to express much of anything, really. But for customers, recommendation engines were sort of bolted onto the customer experience like a robot assistant that was very helpful in taking you where you wanted to go, even if sometimes it was hard to tell what they were up to. And also, very sadly, they were easy to avoid if you felt like that wasn't your thing. With the arrival of ebooks, strangely, our metaphors really didn't change. Even though the product itself was now incorporeal, we still had humans doing human work over here and machines doing their thing over there. And for all their complexity, we kind of treated this new technology as just another shelf or a carousel, and we let well enough alone. And I think we got a little bit stuck. So I think the way we get out of this is by learning to work with machines that can make decisions. And so, without further ado, let's learn about machine learning. Where was the yes from? Thanks, Iris. First, we have to talk about us. When we talk about ourselves as consumers, we talk about genres, right? We read YA fiction. I'm a YA fiction reader. I listen to hip hop or Drake, which seems to be an emergent subcategory of hip hop. Someone at Spotify was like, this is in Canada. In Canada, we must make the site look like this. It's a wonder Maestro Fresh West isn't on here too. We watch comedies, right? That's a thing. It's a big bucket, including a lot of different things. But why? Why are we so gross in these categorizations? I think it's because it's a hard thing to figure. And keeping categories small in number helps us. So we sort a potentially infinite number of things into these buckets, and then we let the potentially infinite number of users, of customers, of readers, of listeners declare their interests in each bucket. And no matter how many books or how many readers, the buckets are all you have to worry about, and the only hard part is finding the time to sort through them all. There's no probabilities to calculate, there's just sorting it. So as a computing task, it's something we're pretty well equipped to do as a species. As a bookseller, this kind of methodology gets you into a habit of speaking about clearly defined classes, like you've got your YA customers, you've got your sci-fi customers, you've got your romance customers, and you got your business customers over there. And they're all in their narrow track, and don't they look lovely mounted on a wall like that, right? And it's not bad, right? That's something we call genre segmentation. It makes perfect sense. And Kobo's used it to good result. Very simply, it works like this. First, you decide if the thing you're doing has notably limited appeal, right? Is this going to be, is it beyond people having a preference for this? And are there going to likely be users who have a preference against it? Great, you figured that out. Now you figure out which of your customers have a purchase history that aligns with that. So this is going to alienate a bunch of people. It's going to be other people's jam. Figure out whose jam it's going to be. And then distribute only to those readers. So a lot of this experimentation happens in email. Email is a really great platform for experimenting. Like I say, it's a little old school, but by God, it works. And genre segmentation works. You still capture the vast majority of sales by cutting out huge chunks of customers who've never demonstrated any reason for being into the thing you're selling. So that's sort of okay, and that's not a bad idea, but it's not perfect. And for a long time, we've been looking for ways to improve that. Consider the problem of fitting a customer into a slot. Who knows what people are trying to tell you when they're buying books? Or we disagree about the slots, right? Not every, you've all got some experience with someone whose decisions, whose job it was to make decisions about BISACs. Did you always agree with them? Do you always agree with yourself? Because this stuff gets carved in stone and it gets stuck. And we don't even ask readers what they think before we do it. So that's a concern. And the third one, my favorite, is the Hunger Games problem. What does the Hunger Games tell us about a reader's interests? That they love science fiction? Maybe. That they enjoy narratives with female protagonists? Possibly. It could be that they'll read any book that seizes that much attention in popular culture, or it could be that they finally found a narrative that speaks to their abiding love of archery. It's kind of impossible to discern, right? And so, it's thorny enough that it makes you question the purpose of categorization at all, and you'd be right to in this context. If we're trying to determine what other books this reader might be interested in, wouldn't we be better off looking for patterns among many other readers with books in common with this reader? I think we would. So it is my distinct pleasure and honor daily to be able to work alongside some data scientists who tolerate me with the patience of saints, and they've taught me a lot. The biggest lesson I've taken away from my amazing colleagues is how to identify problems that you can solve with computers and large data sets. So we're going to talk about a couple of those. This is a concept from machine learning. Is anybody familiar with this concept? And actual data scientists need not raise their hands. I'm looking for lay people. Cool. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So you may want to find something interesting to read somewhere if you're like totally hip on collaborative filtering. I'm going to explain this to everybody else, and I'll call you back later. Collaborative filtering is the basis of pretty much every recommendation engine you've ever used or heard of. Seriously, if you take nothing away from this, let it be said that now you can lean back and say, oh yeah, those guys are pretty good at collaborative filtering, I guess, as nonchalantly as possible. You should practice it. Keep doing it till you're cool, till you sound completely uninterested and on the verge of falling asleep, because at some point, you're going to be discussing this with a consultant, and convincingly affecting a dismissive attitude could save you real money. Telling you. So here's how it works. Collaborative filtering produces recommendations. It does it by, you've got to make some decisions ahead of time. So we look at ebooks, and we look at users, and we define the relationship. We say purchased. Okay, great. That's the relationship. here are the people, here are the things that the people acted upon. So you look at all your users, you look at all the things they have, and you look for coincident things. Who's got the same stuff? Who's got a lot of the same stuff? Among the ones with a lot of the same stuff, which stuff is missing from each one? That's the fun part. So this reader might enjoy Ann Patchett's latest. This might enjoy Margaret Atwood's retelling of The Tempest. And Mr. Stripey Tie over here would probably be into Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, based on what we know about the small number of books and the small number of users and what they've expressed so far. Okay? Anyway, so we go on and on. We draw links like this between all the users and all the books until for every book in the catalog, we've calculated a likelihood of it being purchased next to any other, and we call that the affinity score. You don't need to write that down or anything. It's just a value you hang on relationships. The math is pretty straight up. I didn't even use the special equation button in PowerPoint. I just use underlining. It's that simple. Every book has an affinity to every other, depending on the ratio of those two books being bought together versus being bought alone. So it's kind of like if you never hang out with somebody, but you call them your friend, then you have that low affinity score. But if you're always seen together, it doesn't matter if you say they're your friend or not. You're together all the time. You can never be found apart. It's kind of affinity score. So what that does is it lets us rank things, right? So there's books you have. There's books other people have, and we can pretend for the purposes of this exercise that this slide represents the complete universe of books. It's not bad, but you're going to get through it pretty quick. This is just an exercise, though. Don't panic, guys. If we look at affinity scores of these books recommended to you, we can see that we're more confident about some of these relationships than we are about others, right? There's different values assigned here. And what that means is we can look at all the relationships, we can add them up in terms of how they come to your library. You see there's an accumulation there on Sachi Cole's book because it relates to both super forecasting and Station 11. I'm making all of this up. Again, so we can see that it has the highest score. And what's important is not the actual numerical value. This isn't a 150% chance of you buying this book. We have not this is not forecasting in the supernatural sense. What it tells us is that our value assigned to this is more than twice the next one down. That's the significance. It's about scale. It's about relative values. All right. So don't go walking away saying Kobo knows with 150% certainty what you're going to buy next. Because it's not true, much as I'd like it to be true. So with that ranking, you can run it down the whole catalog of 5 million books so that we have the whole queue ready to go, right? And your last book is the 5 millionth. Usually there's about a 4 million way tie for the last book in your recommendations thing. If we're rounding, it's actually more like a 5 million way tie because what you're actually being recommended is a tiny bit of the froth on top. You get the idea. This methodology is a world away from sorting customers into categories. Categories in this framework are as interesting and useful as we want them to be. We could, of course, use categories to weight the scores in a collaborative filtering framework. And maybe we could discount affinity scores for books that seem to represent a leap from a reader's usual tastes. That's one way you could do it. You could layer in star ratings, though. You could also layer in when the purchase occurred. There's all kinds of stuff you can dial into this as little multipliers. And then through a series of tests, of course, you determine what the optimal weight is for each of these variables, and so on. You test, you optimize. But at the center of it, no matter what you do, no matter what you're looking at, the center is always readers' relationships with books. Okay, cool, you're saying. Thanks for the lecture on data science, you completely unqualified person. Unless me and my team of merchandisers are secretly enrolled in PhD programs on machine learning, I haven't actually told you anything new. I'm sorry. Here comes the new part. So last summer, we were playing around with some new insights at Kobo. This sort of lightning struck. And what I love the most is we actually can't figure out who lightning struck. It was just kind of an idea that showed up, and we started working on it. And to this day, we don't know where it originated. Somebody had a bright idea, and everyone ran with it, and it's lost to the ages. So if automated personalized recommendations are fundamentally just a probability-ranked list of every book in the catalog, then every promotion, every daily deal, every thematic list, no matter what books are in it, is just a subset of that ranked list, which is unique to every user. So it stands to reason that we then can figure out what the probability is of any given promotion mattering to any given user. Are the books in here ranked highly in terms of affinity score for you, or are they ranked low? Are they right off the chart for you? So these are my my top 4 dozen recommendations from Kobo, each data point representing a marvelous reading experience I may never get to, but I'll feel bad about it nonetheless, because it's a pretty good list of books. From highest affinity score to lowest. Now, again, not probabilities, but it's a way of ranking it's a way of ranking the catalog. Now, the interesting thing is, if we draw this trend line, what you see is that it trails off a long way to the right. Lots of books that I'm kind of interested in, even if they never make it to the top, but we all are aware of that. There are books that you're kind of interested in or would be interested in if someone put them in front of you because the package is right and the pitch is right and there's a blurb and that kind of thing. So that's a lot of what's often trailing to the right. So those small scores there, they're probably whispers of interests. Maybe they're being pursued elsewhere. Remember, this is only data that Kobo has. This is only the reflection of a life lived in reading ebooks. For avid readers, there are many books in this affinity score range, this low but significant range. They're not irrelevant. They're just not as obvious as the ones to the left. It's kind of a hot boiling soup on the left, where things fight for the top spot, and then like social dynamics in a prison yard. The biggest one in the yard gets attacked by the new guy and taken down. I am also not qualified to talk about prison social dynamics. But I've watched a lot of Netflix and HBO, and I feel like I could say that much. If any of these books that score at all are featured in a promotion, we expect a reader has a chance of being interested. It certainly isn't irrelevant to them. And so we realized that for as long as we've been calculating affinity scores, we were in a position to answer this question: who is this for? For our best customers. And so with targeting, we're increasingly asking ourselves whether to even market a promotion to given customers. And when we do, we have the further option to arrange the books we present to them in an order reflective of their affinity ranking for that particular customer. 2 very simple terms, 2 very simple words. They're 2 utilizations of essentially the same recommendations technology. So for example, under the old way of thinking, we might have sent both of these romance campaigns to the same customer segment. Romance readers, done, dusted, no problem. But if you're actually a fan of romance books, that makes no sense, right? By looking at the aggregate affinity score of the books in these promotions, we were able to reach the right customers, and they were different. I mean, just count the abs on the one on the left, right? There's many abs. It is abful. The other one is almost like a paint by numbers of cover design. It's quite beautiful in its way. It looks like a box of macarons. Different customers. We only see them the same if we stand at a remove from them. And this was sneaky. I'm really proud of this. I'm especially proud of this because people figured out how to do this. I didn't have to ask anyone. They were like, "Oh, we did this, and then we substituted." Okay. So Lee Russell is a thriller writer in the UK, and we thought she could find a wider audience. So how do you do that, right? That's the dream. How do I find the wider audience? How do I know what my comp titles are, so how do I find the people who read those books? So she got a really good blurb from Lee Child. I don't know if you can read that, but he really did her a favor with one adjective. If that's a real word, it's good enough to sell books. And so what we decided was, if Lee Child's going to put this on here, and the publisher believes that that's relevant, how about we target people who like Lee Child? How about we target people for whom Lee Child is a relevant recommendation? Gather all that up and broadcast. And it worked. Machine learning got us to the answer, but we had to be pretty smart about how to employ it to make that happen. The robots weren't going to stand up and offer this idea on their own. When we've got a sale that's for everyone, though, when we do something that's multi-genre, broad interest, we try to pack in something for every conceivable reader, we have to solve a different problem, right? We're not trying to target. We're not trying to cut people out. We don't believe there's anyone for whom this is negatively preferential, right? This is going to be to someone's preference somewhere, but emails are only so big. The space constraint remains. So how do we make a broad promotion relevant to every customer? Well, in this 3-for-2 promotion that we did, there was titles from a variety of genres. And to make sure it felt that way to our best customers, we personalized the sort order so that the books that went out in the email were in the right ranking for you, based on your affinity scores. It felt like you're in a bookstore and you walked up to the giant table, it's definitely on sale, you are totally into saving money and buying lots of books, and you happen to approach exactly the right part of the table. You didn't walk up to the business side when you were looking for romance books, you didn't walk up to the literary fiction when you wanted sci-fi. We pull them out and we serve them up to you. And I'm talking about genre, I'm still talking about genre, because humans talk about genre. Machines figure out the relationship on a one-to-one level. And this is kind of obsessing us. It's obsessing me anyway. I think I've seen my team sort of shaking their heads as I carry on. When you start from the premise, the old premise, that you get one shot to address your customers, even though as a bookseller you want to address every reader, you want to reach out of the mainstream into the margins, you've got these incentives as a professional tasked with efficiently deploying resources that tell you got to shoot from the mainstream. The mainstream's where the money's at. The mainstream has the least risk. That's where you're going to make the bank. And you've got to kind of let the margins go. That's hard, right? It's low frequency, high stakes. But when you start from the premise that you couldn't possibly create a single perfectly relevant thing, that's actually not an attainable goal, and you should stop thinking you could do it, you start thinking about how many different things could I do for much lower stakes. When you know you can be relevant, you know that's an achievable aim, you spend more time thinking about your customers inconveniently located outside of the mainstream. So I'll take the tail end of this with a story about a product that's still kind of in beta. Insofar as we're still fiddling with it, that hasn't stopped us from rolling it out globally. Why not? It's just software. So in the background, selling new releases is hard. It's something we've wrestled with. It's been literally years of discussions at Kobo about how do we get better at selling new releases. The book industry is weird. Every week there's going to be an event. New books will enter the market. So as a bookseller, you want to be there. Hooray, buy them. But you send out those emails, you do that broadcasting, and customers don't buy the way they buy when stuff's on sale. And it hurts, because you're torn. You want the money, you want to be there in market, but it's not working. And there's a constraint of space. Lots of new books, very different from one another, so many customers. How do you solve this? And it's hard to do it with conventional thinking around collaborative filtering, because you've got virtually no sales history, right? You've got some pre-orders. It helps with some titles, but pre-orders also skew heavily towards genre fiction, big name proven authors. It's really hard to get that early signal on things that are unknown or things that don't have a built-in rabid fan base, even if people will perfectly well enjoy them a few days after release. So we've also got this other problem, which is that there is a lot of information that would make this easier, and it's maddeningly out of reach of any kind of machine. It's not machine readable. Nobody likes when I approach them holding a USB plug looking for, to stick it in their ear or something. It doesn't work. I've tried it for myself. It doesn't work with other people. We needed data scientists. So our big data team is really good. They've optimized this to the hilt of getting books in early. So in the first month of a book's released, if it's for you, you are going to hear about it from through our recommendations systems. Really great about catching that early heat. And that's good, and that's totally impressive, and probably it's good enough if your whole business is selling, there's books, but you're also selling sweaters, and there's phones, and all the infrastructure that runs the internet, and refrigerators, anybody, right? We thought we could do better, though, right? We thought we could offer personalized ranking on day 0. No actual sales, only pre-orders as far as transactions go. How do you do it? It's tough. It's not a comfortable place for data scientists. The reason they're good at it as the month rolls on is because there's more data, there's more certainty, there's a reason to act on this. Early on, you don't have as much as data as they want for drawing conclusions. So we asked ourselves, what happens if we just accept the constraint? We have a small number of books available. the ones highlighted, as new releases by merchandisers. So rather than either or, rather than machines do new releases or merchandisers do it to a point, and machines figure out how to deliver it to the right customers in the right way. And so we did. New releases, sorted, for you. It's still a question of books you have and books you don't. Again, we're in that tiny universe with only 7 books. It is strange. Go with me on this. The relationships are still there, and affinity scores are still there, but they're much more faint. Whispers. It's still enough to make them different from one another, so you can still rank them. The difference is still there. The ranking, if you put them in the grand sea of 5 million titles, would drop them way down the list. But if you had to pick among this small list of titles that's been selected by these inconvenient human beings, you could still rank them. So instead of the 0 scoring title being at the bottom of a 5 million title list, it's just 4th. And it's there because a human being thought it was worth someone's attention. And if we can't figure out whose attention it is, then it just gets tacked on at the end. And then to ensure that we don't see too many titles actually zeroing out, there's a little bit of special sauce in the mix, which we're not going to get into. But there's you can figure this out. There are other signals to look at, right? So it's personalized new releases. We did it. We're still doing it. We did it today in France. It's personalized sorting applied to a curated selection of titles, curated by human beings who have information that is not machine readable. And then we supplemented it. I love this. It got supplemented by a subset of my own personal recommendations. I have angered the AV guys by whacking the microphone that way. Sorry, guys. It's supplemented by a subset of my own personal recommendations filtered down to recent releases. And the cool thing about that was sort of the big data team's idea of like, we can get more new books. You want new? And this is them putting their best foot forward of looking at your whole list of personalized new releases and filtering it down to the very newest stuff. So you're asking, show me the money. The journey to figuring this out is interesting. What we saw initially with this was kind of flatness. There was no big bump. There's no silver bullet results. Kind of middling against a radically different methodology. That was kind of disappointing. It was a little better than average, just slightly, if you kind of tilted your head a bit, but it wasn't the performance leap we were looking for. There will be no chart shared on this. Total letdown. However, when we drilled into the results that we saw and segmented it out by users who actually had enough purchases that they got a robustly personalized experience, those were happy users. When we looked at them as a group, we were actually serving them really well. What we discovered was the people who were never particularly well served continue to be particularly not well served for the same reasons that make recommendations hard. So you solve that problem a different way. You don't do it by just throwing more stuff at them or the same stuff you threw at everybody else. What we learned was when you go from a one-size-fits-all methodology to a one-to-one thing, you can't keep measuring at the one-size-fits-all and call it a day. You do have to break into segmentation. You have to go deeper. You have to have a more fine-grained set of metrics for evaluating your performance. Because that's the world you're in. Because you could make life better for a tiny set of customers that could drive a lot of value. You could be disappointing a tiny set of customers that you would really miss if they went, and so on. So what we found is that rather than narrowing workloads by employing machine learning, personalization is opening doors to new approaches that would actually benefit from more hands on deck, not less. We're seeing, we can see how we're not being relevant to users. We're tantalizingly close to thinking about ways of how we could be relevant. And we're sort of back up against that constraint of like, how many hands do you have and how many hours in the day are there to get work done? So AI skepticism remains, I get it. It's a healthy response to a much abused term. For Kobo though, AI, machine learning, whatever you want to call it, it's a key part of how we work now. And although it's unlikely that we're going to see AI taking over bookselling in whole anytime soon, I am absolutely certain that we're going to see it put to work more in all kinds of content industries. Certainly Facebook isn't going to stay away from machine-enhanced human capabilities forever. But maybe this is the path we were waiting for to get online bookselling unstuck from its old metaphors. I'm certain that at some point in the careers of most of the people in this room, one day these augmentations of human capability are going to feel as natural as this. But I know that's going to take a ton of work. In the meantime, baby steps. Thank you. Do you want to hear a story about how collaborative filtering is hard? It's a thing I left out of the talk. So when you've got a large group of uniform customers, so one of the problems we have in ebooks, I got no strings. One of the problems in ebooks is it skews heavily towards fiction, and it's really hard to sell nonfiction. So you wind up with this giant group of romance readers. As we know, a highly differentiated, very diverse group of people with multiple interests, but at 100 yards, we just call them romance readers. They're big enough that they dwarf out all these other small categories. So you compare romance readers to people who read like big ideas, that hardcover nonfiction stuff. And one of the problems you get is in terms of actual numbers, like straight up like count the numbers. We looked at the calculation for Affinity Score. You wind up with, if all the people who loved this Nora Roberts book, if a tiny margin of them were into super forecasting by Phil Tetlock, then what you wind up with is this curious overlap between the marginal activities of this hegemonic group and the actually deeply interested activities of this smaller group, and you wind up recommending Nora Roberts to these people who are down here, because like in terms of like the strict count, you're like, I'm telling you, you like that super forecasting book, and I have several readers who have enjoyed the works of a Nora Roberts, who you might be interested in. So you've got to, so when I talked about categorization as something you want to dial in, sometimes you want to do that. You want to look for, you want to impose patterns on readers that you want to take as much signal as you can from them. So strictly looking at purchases or strictly looking at pre-orders or whatever is usually not the whole picture. You want to dial in more. And as I talk about this, I am so out of my depth. So I'm going to swim back to shore and take a question.
How do you court data scientists to work in publishing?
That's a really good question. First of all, it helps that Kobo is not a publisher. No joke. It is extremely helpful that we enjoy a market position of being a technology company that works in the area of books. So there's that. Secondly, it's really hard, and I have no good answers. It's tough. Our new director of data science, Darius Brazionis, spends a lot of time interviewing, hiring, trying to hire. So yeah, the answer is it's really hard. And I hate to come up with that right after the diversity panel where I think we ended with, it's really hard.